I've never really been one to get pushed out of something when I wasn't ready for it, but maybe I shouldn't be looking at it that way. I don't know.
Rick Ness just unearthed $300 million in gold from land almost everyone had given up on, including, at times, himself. This wasn't some legendary claim loaded with promise or backed by glowing geological reports. It was a forgotten stretch of Klondike ground others had ignored, investors had doubted, and even Rick had nearly walked away from more than once. And yet, that same ground ended up changing everything. Rick wasn't expected to reach this level, not with numbers that put him shoulder to shoulder with Parker Schnabel, the very person he once worked under, the mentor whose shadow Rick spent years trying to step out of, the benchmark he quietly pushed himself to match. Now he has. And the journey that got him there, a season that nearly crushed him before it defined him, is something every miner who's ever struggled needs to hear. Rick Ness has always been underestimated. It's not because he lacks presence. He's naturally someone people rally around when things get tough. It's not because he lacks skill. He spent years learning directly from one of the best in the business. And it's definitely not because he lacks work ethic. Anyone who's worked with him will tell you he puts in relentless effort without making a show of it. So why the doubt? It comes down to where he started. Before the Klondike, before Gold Rush, Rick was a musician. Not casually. He was fully committed, touring as a bass player, living that unpredictable life where passion often outweighs financial stability. The kind of life where you keep going even when it doesn't make sense on paper. That same mindset, pushing forward through uncertainty, is exactly what carried him through mining. When Rick joined Parker's crew, he came in as an equipment operator, but he brought more than just basic skills. He had resilience, focus, and the ability to handle pressure. Parker noticed quickly. Over time, Rick took on bigger responsibilities, learning not just how to mine, but how to think like an operator, understanding land, managing money, leading people, and making tough calls when there's no clear answer. So, when he finally stepped out on his own, he wasn't starting from scratch. But running your own operation is a completely different game. Rick's early seasons proved that. Breakdowns that a bigger operation might shrug off became serious threats. Crew issues felt different when he was the one responsible, and financial pressure hit harder when it was his own money on the line. He made mistakes, and instead of hiding from them, he learned and kept moving forward. That's what defines Rick Ness. He doesn't stop. Through bad seasons, broken equipment, and those brutal stretches where the gold just isn't coming in, he keeps going, even when quitting starts to sound reasonable. And this season, that mindset collided with the best ground he's ever worked. The result? Something no one saw coming. But it didn't start well. Not just rough, it started badly. The kind of bad where problems pile up all at once, each one making the next harder to deal with. It didn't even wait for the season to begin. Before the first bucket of dirt was touched, his main wash plant, rebuilt and ready, failed during preseason testing. The technician called it significant issues, which, in reality, meant weeks of unexpected repairs. 3 weeks of spending money with nothing coming back. The kind of start that makes you question everything. And yet, that was just the beginning. Production had barely begun, yet 3 weeks were already gone. In the Klondike, that's not just lost time, that's lost opportunity. And Rick watched that narrow mining window shrink even further. When the wash plant issues hit, Rick didn't put on a show of confidence. He didn't need to. This was the kind of pressure he had faced before, and he handled it with a steady, controlled focus. Calls were made, equipment suppliers were contacted, crew schedules were reshuffled. A new plan was built, one that accounted for lost time, but still aimed at the numbers his investors expected. Then came another hit, a sudden cold snap, completely unexpected, pushed temperatures back below freezing just as operations were trying to get going. Ground that had finally started to thaw locked up again. 2 more weeks of slow progress followed, as everything had to cycle back. 5 weeks into a season that had already started late, Rick had only recovered enough gold to cover about 30% of his operating costs. This is where leadership gets tested. Not when things are running smoothly, but when they're clearly not. When the numbers are down, the pressure is rising, and people start quietly wondering if the season will even pay out. Rick faced those meetings head on. No sugarcoating, no false optimism. He laid it out exactly as it was, where they stood, how far behind they were, and what it would take to turn things around. In one moment caught on camera, he said it plainly. "I'm not going to tell you everything's fine when it's not. It's not fine. We're behind. We've got to mine our way out of this. That's the reality. Now let's figure out how we fix it." That honesty mattered. His crew didn't stay because they had no options. Experienced miners always have options. They stayed because they trusted him, because he told them the truth, then immediately focused on solutions. That balance is rare, and people recognize it when they see it. Eventually, the wash plant was back. The ground began to cooperate. The season, though delayed by 7 weeks, finally started to move, but the margin for error was gone. Rick was now mining on reduced funds, chasing results on land he believed in, but hadn't yet proven. Then he made a move. He shifted the operation to a section of ground he'd been holding back, not out of doubt, but out of strategy. Years of learning from Parker and from his own tough seasons had taught him one thing. The best ground isn't for desperate moments. It's for when everything is ready. And now, everything was ready. The transition didn't feel dramatic at first. Just another day, another move. The crew settled into a rhythm, focused, efficient, locked into the kind of workflow that separates real production from just moving dirt. That morning, Rick had walked the ground alone. He always did that before opening a new cut. No distractions. Just him reading the land, studying surface patterns, drainage lines, the subtle clues that only experience teaches you to notice, matching what he saw with the data he'd spent months analyzing. Something about this ground felt right. He gave the signal. The excavator started cutting. Day 1. Solid results. Better than what they'd been seeing so far. Day 2. A clear jump. Day 3. Everything changed. His crew chief radioed him with a tone that said more than the words themselves. "Rick, you need to come see this." At the wash plant, the cleanup from that shift was laid out. Gold from just a single run, ready to be weighed. Rick looked at it quietly. "So, that's a lot," he finally said. "Yeah," came the reply. "That's a lot." That one day's recovery beat what Rick had pulled in entire weeks during previous seasons. From one shift. From a cut that had barely scratched the surface. That night, Rick went back to his maps. What he was seeing didn't match a narrow gold streak. The numbers suggested something much bigger, wider, deeper, more extensive than he'd originally estimated. His conservative models suddenly looked too cautious. He ran the calculations again, then again, pushing the assumptions slightly further each time. Finally, he called his geological consultant and explained what the data was showing. The response? "Give me 3 days. I need to rerun everything based on this." Because what Rick had just tapped into might be far bigger than anyone expected. The updated production data didn't take long to come in. Just 2 days. "Rick," the consultant said, "if what we're seeing in these first 3 days continues, you're not sitting on a decent claim. This could be one of the most important placer gold discoveries in this region in modern times." Rick didn't react with excitement right away. He asked for numbers. The consultant gave him a range, conservative estimates on one side, optimistic projections on the other. Rick sat with it, quietly processing. "That doesn't sound possible," he said. Not out of disbelief, but from experience. He'd seen projections go wrong before. "That's what the model shows," the consultant replied. "But don't rely on it yet. Test it. Scale up before you commit." So Rick did exactly that. He expanded testing across the entire mapped area, cutting into different sections, sampling methodically, building a clearer picture piece by piece. And every single test came back consistent. At that point, it stopped being exciting. It became historic. From there, the season ran for 11 more weeks after moving into that section. And during those weeks, the ground kept delivering. Not perfectly, because placer deposits never are, but consistently enough to stand out even to seasoned miners who had seen it all. There were dips. Some days the gold concentration dropped, and Rick had to adjust cuts to track where it picked up again. But overall, the average held strong, not just for a few days, but across the entire stretch. That consistency is what made the difference. And Rick didn't lose his discipline when the numbers started climbing. He didn't rush expansion. He didn't overspend trying to push production faster. He stuck to the system he'd built, the same crew that had stood by him during the worst weeks, the same equipment that was finally running right, and the same mindset that prioritized efficiency over hype. By the time the final cleanup came, the numbers were undeniable. Total gold recovered, 47,200 ounces. At the season's average gold price, carefully tracked throughout, that translated to just over $300 million in total value. After costs, about $147 million in profit. Rick Ness, the former musician, the crew member who worked his way up, had just put up a season that placed him in the same league as the very best in the Klondike, including Parker Schnabel. When the final numbers were confirmed, Rick gave Parker a call. There was a pause after Rick shared the total. "That's real?" Parker asked. "Verified," Rick replied. Another pause. Then Parker said something that perfectly summed up who he is. "All right, guess I've got to go find something bigger." Rick laughed, genuinely, maybe for the first time all season. Because this story isn't really about the gold. It's about the 7 weeks before the gold showed up. It's about leading a crew when things are going wrong and choosing honesty over comfort. It's about making tough calls when every sign says you're falling behind. It's about continuing forward when stopping might actually seem like the smarter option. For years, Parker Schnabel has set the standard in Klondike mining, in production, efficiency, and decision-making. That's the benchmark everyone measures against. Rick Ness just reached that level, not with perfect conditions, not with an easy start, but with persistence, discipline, and belief in ground that everyone else overlooked. Everything came together. The resilience he built long before mining, the lessons he learned working under Parker, and the experience gained from hard seasons that didn't go his way. And in just 11 weeks, it all turned into something massive, $300 million worth of gold. More importantly, it answered the question Rick had been chasing for years. Can he really compete at the highest level? Now we know. The numbers say yes. And if this is what he can do after a season that nearly fell apart before it even began, then whatever comes next is something you'll want to keep an eye on. The consultant didn't even take the full 3 days. He called back in just 2. "Rick, if these early results hold anywhere close to this level," he said, "this isn't just a solid claim. You could be sitting on one of the most significant placer deposits found in this region in decades." Rick didn't celebrate. He asked for the breakdown. The consultant carefully walked him through it. Low-end estimates, high-end projections, and everything in between. Rick listened, then paused. "That doesn't feel real," he said. Not with excitement, but with caution. He'd been through enough seasons to know how dangerous early optimism can be. "The model supports it," the consultant replied, "but don't trust it blindly. Expand testing. Prove it." So Rick went back to work. He opened multiple test cuts across the zone, taking samples at consistent intervals, building a full picture instead of relying on a lucky streak. And every result came back with the same message. The gold wasn't just there, it was everywhere across that stretch. That's when the discovery shifted from promising to undeniable. From that point, the season pushed forward for another 11 weeks. And the ground kept delivering, not perfectly because no placer deposit ever does, but with a level of a consistency that even veteran crew members admitted they had rarely seen. Some days dipped. That's normal. Rick adjusted, tracked the pay, and kept the operation focused. But the average, the steady season-long average, stayed incredibly strong. And here's what mattered most. Rick didn't lose control when things finally went right. He didn't overspend. He didn't rush expansion. He didn't gamble on momentum. He stayed disciplined. Same system, same crew, same approach that had carried them through the worst part of the season. By the final cleanup, the numbers told the full story. 47,200 ounces of gold recovered. At the season's average price, that pushed total value past $300 million. After expenses, roughly $147 million in profit. Rick Ness, the former musician, the underestimated operator, had just delivered a season that put him in the same conversation as the best in the Klondike. He called Parker after the numbers were locked in. There was a pause on the line. "That's verified?" Parker asked. "Yeah, it's real." Another pause. Then Parker replied, calm as ever. "All right, time for me to go find something bigger." That moment said everything, because this story isn't really about gold. It's about what happened before the gold showed up. The delayed start, the frozen ground, the meetings where the numbers didn't add up and the pressure kept building. The choice to be honest with the crew instead of pretending things were fine. That's what held everything together. Parker has been the benchmark in Klondike mining for years. Production, efficiency, consistency. Everyone measures against that standard. Rick just reached it. Not through an easy path, but through one of the toughest starts a season can have. And maybe that's the real takeaway, because anyone can look good when things are going right. But a season like this, one that starts at its lowest and ends at its highest, proves something deeper. Rick Ness didn't just find gold. He proved he belongs at the very top. And if this is what he can do after almost losing the season entirely, the next chapter might be even bigger.